Welcome to TGS, Transform, Grow, Succeed. This podcast is about your work as a caring professional and the wicked systemic issues that all of us are transforming into opportunities to achieve excellence in any environment. My name is Dr. Gravoy, Executive Director of TGS Educational Consulting. I'm excited to introduce Drs. Toni Harrison Kelly and Sharla Horton-Williams, co-founders of School Leadership for Social Justice, SLSJ. Together, they have a vision for a just and equitable society that affords exemplary opportunities and realizes excellent outcomes for all. A key part of their work is to provide equity, inclusion, and belonging training and consulting for schools and organizations. Friends, did I get that right?
Perfect.
All right, fantastic. I invited Toni and Sharla to the show today to talk about school leadership for social justice and how their approach to equity and anti-racism supports the kind of change that all of us who lead schools and nonprofits want to see in our organizations. And so, are we ready to jump in?
Let's go, Tim.
All right, let's go. So first, actually, I'd like to dive right into that word anti-racism. And for me, just that word just means taking action to dismantle racism, and something that, like, in my view, has kind of always been our job as school leaders or leaders of caring organizations. However, of late, it's come very obvious to me that a great many of us in education seem to be allergic to that word, anti-racism. I'm wondering, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I'll start there. I think one of the things about anti-racism, you can't really become an anti-racist educator or person, or anything until you accept the reality of racism. So without accepting that this is part of the fabric of our society and therefore the fabric of our schools, it is easy to be allergic to it, to use your words. And so I think one of the things that's so important is that, and one of the things that we really try to do in our work with schools is really create a strong case for anti-racist work through this rationale, not just what's out there, but we try to use a windows and mirrors approach. Like, yes, we all know that there's racism out there, but what about right here? What about in our school? What about in our district? What about in our own hearts? And so by doing that in a way that's both safe and brave at the same time, we are able, I think, to really get people to let their guards down about the word, about the term, and everything associated with it.
I also think that we are able to lead this work with such empathy because we've had to do this work. So when we talk about anti-racism and that word being a trigger, it's not just for white educators. It's not just a trigger for those who are white. It is also a trigger sometimes for people who are of color or from racially marginalized groups, but who also have been raised in whiteness, in this system that champions and supports and elevates whiteness above all. And so I think we are very sensitive when we are approaching new groups to all the emotional baggage and weight that comes with the word anti-racism. And so we make sure that we address that up front, that it's a head-on discussion about what anti-racism is, what whiteness is not, so that there's a comfort, honesty, and a transparency that we help establish from jump so that we're ready to make some changes and grow.
Yeah.
So I really like that way that you both kind of put it, that safe and brave seems to be a really effective way of approaching this work in schools. Would you tell me a little bit more? Like, what does that mean exactly? That you're going to create a space that's safe and brave, but at the same time, I really make that case that racism is a real thing and it's something that's endemic in our schools.
I think the safety part is what Toni just talked about, like really sharing our own anti-racist journeys. We were both raised in very different yet similar backgrounds. As two Black women, we have, I went to an all-Black school, I went to an all-Black church, I lived in largely an all-Black community. Toni, on the other hand, grew up in where there were very few Black kids in her school. She never had a Black teacher. And so on the other hand, her mom was active in the NAACP, and like she really did lots of intentional work around grounding Toni in her Blackness. I had very few of those intentional exposures outside of school and kind of my performing arts, just the way I lived. It was just growing up in Blackness without centering Blackness necessarily, intentionally centering it. So just by talking often about the fact that we show up in the world and we showed up in our schools and in our classrooms with whiteness, even in our work, and what that looks like and how it manifests, and how it impacted our kids. I think what that does is it breaks down this defensiveness, and it really mitigates this mentality that like, we're not calling everybody racist, right? We're just talking about this reality that, like you said, racism is endemic in our society, even in, people, and whiteness resides deeply in pretty much every context. So that safety comes from our own transparency, our own vulnerability, and sharing our own truth. But the bravery comes in really sharing another part of our truth, which is how racism has impacted our own lives, how we've uncovered that impact over time as we've kind of just dug into our own family histories and our own journeys, our own personal and professional journeys, how it's impacted us both as educators, me as a parent, Toni as a Black woman, and so the humanity, I think, that we share in our work really positions people, hopefully, and that's the goal, positions people to be ready to really dig into the conversation.
One of the stories I like to tell about my upbringing is in second grade, I had, the little lunch box with the thermos. And, that was the cool thing in the 80s, is you had your lunch box, your thermos, you carried it every day. It was kind of a status symbol, kind of a thing to have. My lunch box and thermos were from the Dukes of Hazzard. Their car was called the General Lee.
Yep.
And it had the Confederate flag across the top of the car. My thermos had the Confederate flag wrapped around it. So every day as a second grader, I was toasting to the Confederacy, just not really having any knowledge and understanding of how off that was, how I was literally supporting the group that that had enslaved my ancestors, and just the whiteness that I was raised in. And so then when I got to teach middle school, my expectations of my students were all from a deficit point of view. Please, you got to speak correctly. You have to do these things. That you need to, this is right. And what I really meant was, this is whiteness. This is whiteness. And this, if you were whiter like me, then you too could succeed. And my students taught me very quickly. By the December of the first semester, being in this school that was almost all Black, and all students who came from homes that were, socioeconomically disadvantaged, they taught me very quickly that relationships mattered more than anything. That, do you love me? Do you care about me? Okay, then you can challenge me once I give you permission. And so we understand from many perspectives what it looks like to build brave, safe environments. And so when we talk about brave and safe, the two have to go together. You can't just be safe to say what you want and not challenge to be courageous and change. So we really position the two things together so that there is that warmth that is needed, the freedom and trust. There's also this rigor to our trainings, this rigor to our conversations. Please elevate yourself from where you are. You're not going to leave here the same, and that is never the goal for us. So the brave and the safe have to go together.
Yeah, no, I love it. And honestly, having participated in a number of your workshops, I see how that brave and safe really come together so beautifully. I remember presenting to some very, very challenging quotes that came from students of color at a high school that you're working with. And what I saw was a faculty that was really ready to lean into that work. And it sounds like, I was going to ask you, what do you think made the difference? But it sounds like, Toni, that's what you described, that you created, that you worked really hard to create relationships first, and so that people gave you permission to challenge them. And I saw how that works. And the other side of it is I also saw how yes, the warmth was there, but that data was dealt with. That this is stuff that your students are saying about what it's like to be a student here at the school. And we are going to address that as part of that. I'm wondering, like, what is the magic of that? What is the magic of brave and safe?
I will start this time. When you were just talking, when we talk about a faculty being ready for this work, it starts with leadership readiness. If their leader is not leading this work, in this work with them, the most effective trainings that we've seen are the ones where the principal and the assistant principal are shoulder to shoulder in the training, right there learning along with the staff and able to reflect and write those things into policy. And I think that implied responsibility and accountability is so important. So starting with the leader and then having this humility, this coming to this work, wanting to love kids the best way you can. And I think we as a company and we as people, we operate from this altruistic assumption of teachers. Teachers, they first want to do no harm. I believe that. I truly believe that about every teacher that we face and we discuss. They don't want to hurt the students. They want to help. They want their students to grow and feel like they belong. And so that's the starting place for this bravery and warmth is our agreed common goal of helping all students in the best way possible.
And to add to that, I think one of the things that we do that we've learned to do really well is to create the case for change. So yes, they come in and they don't want. We believe that teachers wake up every day wanting to do what's right for kids. But sometimes you don't know that you're causing harm. So this discovery, this process of discovery, for example, like we're not saying that you hurt kids. We want to show you what kids say about how they're impacted by the work that you do. And you go through the reflective and metacognitive process of figuring out, what does that mean? Was that me? How did I do that? One of my former superintendents that I worked for a few years ago said, you can't hit what you don't see. And he was talking about a baseball. So when he was a young boy and he was playing baseball, he got hit with the ball once. And then after that, he didn't want to play ball anymore. His parents made him play ball. But when he went up to the home base to hit, he would have his eyes closed. And once his dad realized why he wasn't hitting the balls anymore, he was like, son, you can't hit what you don't see. So you've got to open your eye and see the ball coming. And so part of this readiness and part of this idea of teachers leaning into the work and leaders leaning into the work is seeing not just the stories that we tell ourselves about the impact that we're having on students, but the stories that our students are actually telling us about the impact that our work is having on them.
So that's a really powerful thing that you're noticing, and it's actually come up a couple of different ways with other leaders that I've talked to, and the work that I do with schools. That's related to school discipline and social emotional learning and trauma informed care, et cetera. But the most important thing that comes out of that work is the best way to do it is talk to the people who it's for, and make sure that we actually understand what it's like to experience whatever it is that we say we're doing. For students, we need to actually know in their own words what their experience of all of this really is. How do you get that information? Like what do schools do if that hasn't really been part of their practice to figure all this out?
So we developed a student experience survey. It's super simple. That we encourage schools, if they don't already have data that they've collected from students on their experience, we encourage them to use this student experience survey. It takes students maybe 10 minutes to do it. And it just asks things like, how do you feel about do you believe your teachers care about you? Do you believe that your racial and or cultural and or ethnic identity is important to the adults in your school? To what degree do you feel like who you are is welcome in the school setting? So we encourage schools and teachers, even like at the individual level, teachers, collect this data from your students. Principals, collect this data for your school. And we use that as a starting point for them seeing, like really contextualizing the work specifically, like at a very micro level. It's so easy to look at the big data, the national data, even the district level data. But like we said earlier, like, what about me? What about my school? What about my classroom? What about my students?
Also, we always warn teachers before they do it that students are going to be very honest. So one time I gave a survey and I asked, what is Miss Kelly do differently or better than any other teacher? And I had a student reply, not a DAMN thing. Yes. So be ready for honesty.
Ouch.
I cried a little bit. I did cry a little bit. But be ready for the honesty. But when you're ready for it, they're ready to give it. When you're ready and you create this safe environment, yet again, when you create this environment where they know that you're going to listen and respond to what they have to say, they'll tell you what to do and what areas to work on.
You can't hit a ball you can't see, is what I'm hearing. And the student experience survey is the tool that the SLSJ uses to help schools see the ball. Am I getting that right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, and that's the other thing that honestly that I really love about the work that you do is that while it is really important to get into like the values and the theory and the real macro level of this anti-racist equity work, that has to happen. The other thing that has to happen is somebody's got to go to work and they have to lead a school. Someone has got to go into a classroom and teach students, and there has to be something about practice that changes as a result of that. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk more about what has to happen for schools to do this kind of work effectively. Educational inequity is real, but equity is possible, and you can achieve it in your schools. You can change the story. School Leadership for Social Justice helps educators, schools, and districts start, deepen, and sustain their educational equity work and accelerate academic excellence. SLSJ is an IRS-recognized 501c3 serving schools, districts, and education-adjacent organizations. Contact Dr. Sharla Horton-Williams, co-founder of School Leadership for Social Justice today, at sharla@slsj.us. Welcome back. So I've noticed on SLSJ's Facebook page that you're talking more and more about belonging and how that elevates equity work beyond diversity. And I'm wondering from your perspective, what is the difference between belonging and diversity, and why does it matter as we think about like schools actually engaging in this work of anti-racism?
Interesting you should ask that question, because I just did a roundtable with a transit focused community group the other day, and we had this exact same discussion about belonging versus equity versus inclusion versus diversity. Diversity is simply the people in the room, but belonging is an outcome of all the things that happen between diversity and that belonging, right? So there's the equity is simply ensuring that it's the outcome of like the work that you do to ensure that the outcomes are statistically the same, regardless of your many identities that you show up with. And justice is all of the things that you do, the actions, the deliberate and intentional supports and systems and structures that are in place to get to that equity. When you do all of that and when you're intentional, so belonging is not something you do, it is the natural outflow of all of that work. When students show up to a justice-focused and equity-focused environment, school, classroom, whatever, they naturally feel a sense of belonging. When students don't feel a sense of belonging, or adults even for that matter, don't feel a strong sense of belonging, that's the key, that there's more justice work to do. And we just don't believe, number one, like that any work is effective when people don't see themselves and have a strong sense that they are heard, valued, included, that they are prioritized in the decision-making, in the policy-making, in the practices even of the people in charge.
And I think this is such a great question, and it made me stop to really categorize. I feel like diversity is more of a cognitive approach. It's a checklist. I have this many Black teachers. I have this percent of Black books in my class. I have this percentage of Latinx or Latino books and posters, etc. So you can look around the school and it could look very diverse, but belonging is emotional. It's a feeling. It's centered on the people who are the users, the end users. And so belonging can only be defined by the people who use the environment. And so I think a lot of people are focused on diversity because it's easier.
So easy.
Easier to just check the boxes. We have this many this, and yes, our principal is Black, and yes, our this, and we have female this, and we have that. However, do these people who you've invited in this diversity, do they feel like they belong in this place? Do they know and feel like they can be heard and seen and valued? That's belonging. So belonging is emotional. Diversity can be accomplished by a checklist. Now, not saying diversity is not important. We can't be in an environment and feel like we belong, as Sharla said, without seeing ourselves reflected in this environment.
So diversity is you're seeing as often the primary goal for many schools and organizations that work towards equity and anti-racism, but it's kind of the easiest one and really insufficient to create the kind of workplaces and ultimately society that we're really looking to do, it sounds like.
And Tim, I think the thing that, when people call us and say they're looking for diversity training, it's because it's what they know. It's the term that they've heard, what's out there. And so, as we start to do some sense making with organizations and with schools around what problem it is that they're actually trying to solve, that's when we uncover, oh, it's not diversity, honey. You're bigger than that. You're better than that. What you're really looking for, you're really after justice. You're really after belonging in community. But the term DEI, the term diversity, has been highlighted so much and utilized so much that it's the only thing people it's what they think they're after. And so we spend a lot of time really helping people to understand all the concepts in this DEI anti-racism space. And then for them to name, like, what's your vision? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish through this work? And then give them the language to really articulate the world that they imagine, the school that they imagine, the classroom that they imagine for their students. And that's when they realize it's not really about diversity at all.
Yeah. And so often, I think, especially just as school leaders, we tend to be better at noticing the things that aren't going well, that we notice the problems, we notice that, wow, the reading scores aren't what we want them to be. Oh, our discipline data is showing disproportionate impact on students of color. Wow, we have an all-white staff and an all student of color student population here enrolled at our school. Like, those kinds of things are easy to notice. And the solution sounds pretty easy too, where it's, all right, well, we'll just hire different people. Number one, it's not even always that easy, but then, but past that, we're still bigger than that, that we're bigger than that. And it sounds like one of the things that you're really skilled at doing and want to see the schools you work with do is to have that language for saying, what is it that we're trying to do? And why is it so much better than checking boxes? Why is it so much better than just changing who's here? We want to go even beyond that, it sounds like.
Yeah.
We start every training with.
I was just about to go with the quote.
Okay. Do you know about heart, Sharla?
Yes, the ability to imagine a world that's different than the present and is the beginning of any movement for change. To be able to communicate the world one imagines and to have it feel possible is the power of narrative. And we got that quote from America Healing from one of their documents. And that's really what it's all about. It's about, like, here's the story that we tell in our heads, or here's the story that we believe. Here's the real story. Here's the story that we want. Here's what we want to be true for our students. And then we go through the process of seeing, like, this really is possible. And here's the role that you can play in that. Here's what this can look like. And then really encouraging them to start the process of putting that story to words, putting that narrative to words, and the role that they play in it coming to fruition. So we start and end every single session, every single time, because we want to hammer that point down that the story can change and you play a part, a significant role. No matter what role you hold in the school, you play a significant part in writing a new story for your students.
That's so powerful, the idea of story, the idea of narrative, that we tell ourselves the story of the way things are, the way our classrooms run, the way our schools work, the policies that have to be, the laws that are there, and always to note that they're actually pretty malleable, that anything that we can do anything we want and change anything we want. That's powerful. Especially
at the classroom level, especially at the administrative level. So if we're talking to school leaders, sure, you have the power to emphasize and elevate these conversations and these discussions, and sure, we can give you more tools, but your willingness and your bravery, again, will be what carries these movements after we're long gone. So empowering them to know that this can be different when they look at a situation that they don't like
Mhm.
in school related to equity, related to diversity, giving students, I mean, teachers and leaders the ability to imagine a different world and then act upon that imagination and to really change it.
So as you think about the schools that you work with and this process of narrative, this process of imagining a world different than what it is, and then taking that imagination, running it through your arms into fingers and writing it down into a narrative, uh, where have you seen this narrative come alive? Like, where have you seen this narrative results in a difference somehow? Like, what's happened?
Toni, what about St. John Paul II and their,
Start there, and I have one too.
okay, great. So one of the schools that we engaged last year for the first time, it's a K-8 parochial school in Minnesota, and we did Teach Well with them, which is really our flagship series about on teaching, learning, and instruction. And after we did all the things, we talked about lesson design and delivery, and we talked about learning partnerships, and we talked about culturally relevant pedagogy and all of that. As we went through this process, because we really tried to include so much reflection and introspection, opportunities for introspection, and like, where do I see myself in this work? What has my practice historically been? What have I uncovered and learned as a result of today's session, and where am I going from here? And in our final debrief session with the school leader, with the principal, she's like, I don't know what you all have on the agenda, but here's what we've talked about. Number one, we know that we've got to do more work with you. And number two, we want our next engagement with you to be very practically oriented towards the way, the policies, and not just what we do in our classroom, but what we do across our school. And so our project with them next is going to be to design, to co-create, imagine and design with them a culturally responsive STEM/STEAM focused progressive curriculum that from kindergarten all the way through 8th grade, they are providing rich and robust experiences in STEM and STEAM focused experiences that highlight, that really create, like, shine a light on opportunity and experiences for their students as they matriculate all the way through the school. Because one of the realizations that they came to was that, we're doing a lot of stuff, but it's not changing the experiences that our students are having. And we're starting to see that experiences really are the gateway to opportunity. And so they want to make sure that they're expanding all of the opportunity that they have, that they're able to provide to students in their school.
That's fantastic, because it really does come down to that concrete level of what are we teaching, what are we doing, what's on the calendar for students to do. And so that must be just really satisfying to see the work go from something that's in our minds and in our hearts to something that's like out there in the classrooms happening.
I think my favorite example is from Prospect High School, Principal Paul Tenza. And so we came and we did teach well with the teachers, and we talked about these principles and things to do, and think how education and classroom activities and things can support equity. And then he turned around and created a new observation tool based on the tenets from Teach Well. And so he wrote into his observation protocol, these are the things that I'm looking for in your lessons related to equity. And so that kind of top down, just all the way to the teacher level, to the student level. And he also brought us in to talk to his students. So it was like, we don't want to just be anti-racist, we want to create anti-racist. And so that kind of complete ecosystem of equity is really encouraging for me to see them think of the story and then watch it just unfold at so many different levels in one school. It is very encouraging and inspirational.
And I'm absolutely convinced that that whole process of imagination first and narrative second, and then communicating that narrative next is exactly how that happens. That first, we all had to imagine that something different could happen, and then it's now changing the practice of how leadership happens at the school. all the way down everywhere. Just that there is an ecosystem now that didn't exist before. That must be just really beautiful to see. That's
It is.
fantastic.
It's like our domain triangle coming to life. When we first conceptualized it 2 years ago, it was just theory. And the domain triangle simply says that we operate in 3 different domains at all times in our work as educators: knowledge, mindsets, and behaviors. Knowledge, practices, and behaviors. I'm sorry, knowledge, beliefs, and behaviors. And so what do we know about students? What do we know about structural racism? What do we know about all these things? And what do we believe? And then actually, what do we do? And so to see this constant movement between after every session, after every engagement with a school or a school leader, and that shift in the practice, that shift in the policy change is very, 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 that's the work.
Yeah.
That's the manifestation of the work. Yeah.
That something different happens, and something different and better is now in place because people engage with you and engage this work in such a way. Well, let's take a break for just a second. And when we come back from the break, what I'd like to do is we'll have a final thought from Dr. Toni Harrison Kelly and Dr. Sharla Horton-Williams, and really kind of get into that imagination space just a bit. TGS Educational Consulting provides training in positive behavior interventions and support, PBIS, at all tiers of implementation. And our exceptional PBIS work is often the first way schools get to know TGS Educational Consulting. Schools choose TGS for PBIS training because of our highly personalized approach and exceptional levels of coaching and support from start to finish. Whether your school is just starting or has been implementing PBIS for a while, contact Dr. Tim Gravoy at TGS Educational Consulting for a free initial consultation. Dr. Tim's email is tim@tgseducationalconsulting.com. Once again, that email is tim@tgseducationalconsulting.com. All right, and welcome back. So given that your organization, we got just one final thought here that I think is going to be really neat to see. Just given that what School Leadership for Social Justice is all about is really helping school leaders achieve social justice, actually do it. I'm wondering how you'll know when you've arrived. When will you know that your work has brought about the transformation that you're seeking?
Toni, you want to go first, or you want me to go first?
Sure. The first thing that came to mind for me is that we want to conclude our work at a campus having supported people in their continual learning. So if we see that the campus now understands that the mindset is that we're never done. There's not an arrival point. There's not we're equitable now, check the box, we're done. It is a constant evolution, constant reflection. And when we see schools and organizations change the way they operate fundamentally, that is usually, that's the hallmark for me, that they are on the path to becoming and sustaining equitable work and practices for every person that they serve.
Yeah, and I'll add just a couple of things to that. I think to your last point, Toni, I think some of our favorite emails, messages, direct messages is when we get someone who's been in a session or in a series with us that can't wait to tell us what they've done. Oh, look, this is what, or to say, okay, you said this and I'm about to do this. Should I do it this way or should I do it that? Because now what we see is they are making a really concerted and honest effort at changing their practice. And sometimes that's the right way, sometimes that's the wrong way, it doesn't matter, but they're doing something. So I think, that's one of the ways that we know we're doing something right. To Toni's earlier point about this being an iterative and ongoing, there's not a destination, it's a journey. And we also start every session with Glenn Singleton's 4 agreements. And one of those agreements is to expect and accept non-closure, that the work of anti-racism is necessary because of centuries of systemic oppression. And we're not going to dismantle centuries of systemic oppression and its impact and the implications in 1 or 2 sessions with a group of teachers. So this understanding that the work that we do today is not going to solve the whole problem, but it is one critical step towards the resolution of inequity and towards the achievement of anti-racism is really important. And I think the last thing is that I think we know when we've done it right, when people want more.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's a huge testament to the effect, not just the effectiveness, not that we're like the best, we are, but that's not what I'm saying here, but
You
more.
are exceptional. I mean, having participated in your workshops, they are exceptional. They really are.
Thank you. Thank you. And when people have more questions and want to do more work, I think for us, it's not so much a matter that they got it right or that they have arrived, but that we have achieved something that we really wanted to achieve, which was to get people thinking deeply about the role that they play, about the reality. Number one, understand the problem of inequity and racism in schools and in society more broadly. To see the promise of an anti-racist, of a just and equitable society, and what that can mean for them, what that can mean for their students, what that can mean for their community, and what that can mean for our entire nation. And then also the potential that each one of them holds to create this world that we all imagine.
Potential to create a world we all imagine, and the possibility that me, I could be part of that I could do that. I don't have to just notice. I can take action. That's powerful, and that means a lot to have a message like that. To Toni and Sharla, I really just want to say thank you so much for being here today, and I'm grateful for you for sharing your experience with our listeners. And listeners, I hope you enjoyed our show, and I hope you reach out to me and to Doctors Toni Harrison Kelly and Sharla Horton-Williams. You can find School Leadership for Social Justice at www.slsj.info. And you can find me at www.tgseducationalconsulting.com. But talk to Toni and Sharla first. And again, they are www.slsj.info. Their workshops are exceptional. I absolutely would recommend that any school and engaging this work, embarking upon this work of equity, talk to School Leadership for Social Justice first. They're amazing people, and to be honest, it's been an absolute privilege to get to know you over this past little bit. So thanks for being on the show. I'm grateful for you.
Thanks, Tim. It was great.